Hello. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I do. And I hope all the little things, the little things in this world that make you smile are something that you're thinking about, watching for, anything that just makes you feel at peace. You know, right now, it seems that every little thing that's good, I cling to. There's been so much negativity thrown at me that I don't even understand it. You know, it's kind of bizarre because I wouldn't even conceive of harming anyone or going after them or bearing false witness or anything like that. I really wouldn't. Those thoughts, those kind of thoughts, they don't even cross my mind. You know, when I was a little girl, it was hard. And I remember pictures of me, and I remember me, I had really long black hair. It was long for the longest time. I could sit on it. I remember having my mom wash my hair and comb it out too, and she was like pretty brutal. It was like, and she'd always say, you know, you be still or I'll snatch you bald-headed. And she did, no question. It's really tough when you have to redirect and you have to accept that everything that you thought you knew, that made sense to you, that kind of gave the world meaning, you know, your foundation, even if it was negative, it was still a foundation of sorts, right? And I think that's true. You know, I remember, and I've mentioned this before, saying on the wall in our home, children learn what they live. And they do, you know, where else are we going to learn that if we don't learn it from the adults that are teaching us, right? And it's so easy to fall into into tunnel vision and thinking that one person's way or the way someone is teaching you, you know, you have to be willing to get out of that paradigm and go into maybe a different one. You've got to see it from a different perspective. You know, not just in judgments, but some judgments you have to make because they might save your life. They might change the quality of your life. And if you're always going along with everything that you've always known and you never question anything, you kind of get stuck in this trap. You don't really question that maybe there's more, or maybe that something's awry, or this just doesn't feel right in my soul. My dog's whimpering. My throat's dry. Goodness. What is it, baby? What is it? I'll have to make it short. I need to go take care of her. I do have more to say, so I'm going to come back in a minute after I take care of my little dog. She's old. She's really old and she's very sick. And it's kind of weighing on my heart because I took her to the vet not long ago and he said that, you know, her heartbeat was off and, you know, she has this terrible hack, you know, like her, you know, she has fluids that are filling it because her heart's failing. And, you know, it's been going on for a long time. And there's a sense of dread because she has good days where she's actually really happy and she's fine, or it seems like it. And then other days she's not. And I feel guilty to go the euthanasia route. And I feel guilty for keeping her alive. It's like I'm at war. And I wasn't even going to talk about that, but it's been on my mind quite a bit. And she's dropping these clumps of hair, like, big wads of hair just falling off of her. It's just strange. That's never happened. And she doesn't have an itching problem, and she doesn't have fleas. Her skin's fine. I think it's just a dying process or something for her. I'm just, and I look at her and, oh, she's sweet. And she's been a good girl. I got her, I believe I got her in 2009. I got her because I had another little dog that my sons got me for Mother's Day in 2008. And his name was Diego, the cutest little Chihuahua ever. We got him from the Humane Society. He was just a baby. And I love that dog. Oh my goodness. And when I think about him, it destroys me. One fateful day, he managed to get out, and he had a girlfriend down the street. It was just really weird. These two dogs, my dog Diego and this dog down the street, just loved each other, and they would find ways to get out of the house to go and meet, right? But he was only 2 years old when he slipped out, and I was right behind him. But he went out on the busy street and was hit and killed. And I don't like to make a scene, but I screamed, man. I was screaming and crying. It was literally like a part of me, that little dog, and I was so bonded to him that it just gripped my emotions severely. I couldn't, my brain just couldn't accept and how was I going to make it without him? Because, he would want me to hold him in my arms, and I would come in from work, and he would want me to lay down on the bed right by him, and it's like, I've got things to do, but, I'd always make time for him. He was just my little soulmate puppy. He really was. He was just incredible, and I think that for me, I have a very strong soul attachment to animals. There's just a thing going on there where I really do, bond with them. But this dog, this was a very special relationship that I had with this little creature, and I loved him. And when that happened, I felt sorry for the lady too, because, and she didn't really talk to me, but I know that there was a lady there, and somebody told me that she was crying because she had hit him. And I mean, it was a busy street. It wasn't, anybody's fault. Maybe it was mostly mine because the screen door wasn't latched, because he could just push it and it would open. But I was right behind him too, and so I was right there when it happened. And I've still not recovered. I keep his bandanas. I do. And he knows I love him so much. One of the things that happened, though, that during that time, after he had died, was that I felt his tugging. Like, I would go down to the basement to put laundry in the washing machine, and I would know, or I would feel him tugging. Like, I could feel this, whimpering, as if he wanted me to hold him, and I couldn't, because he was in spirit. I couldn't pick him up, and it was just like, and then I would go upstairs and I would feel his spirit so strongly that I would just sob. I just would sob. And I had two other dogs too at the time, and they would be on the bed, and I think they felt that confusion too. But having them there, it didn't replace Diego. And I ached, and I could feel him. And then when I would lay there with my other dogs, I would feel him on the bed too. And he was confused too. And I was just begging angels to please help me, to take, and I had to tell him, I said, honey, go play, it's going to be okay. Which was really hard because I didn't want him to leave, but every time that he would come around, I would start wailing. I could feel him, and I would start wailing. Somebody explained that to me, because it was true. And so this situation with Lily who we got in 2009 to be friends with Diego. And they had 1 litter of puppies together that, we sold. But it was a time too when my boys were, well, no, I guess when Diego died, Cameron was on his mission. Hayden hadn't left yet. But I did get to talk to him. It was just like my child, one of our, it was really upsetting for all of us that Diego died, But somehow, things happen in threes. Somebody hit me in a company truck, I had a court case, a divorce case, and I had an attorney from this guy that my ex that has decided to, come after me, attack me because, he feels sorrier for himself than he feels sorry about the abuse that he caused in my life and the lives of my boys. He doesn't remember that part, and his, cheating and unfaithfulness. But the abuse was severe, so he was a bully. There's just no question. And, and it's really interesting how he's rallied so many people to be against me, but the truth hasn't been told. They've created this whole scenario because of money that's coming to me, right? They just, siblings and they just can't stand that something good's going to happen for me. And believe me, it came from a lot of hard work. And, the thing is that I have a talent, a wonderful talent that the Lord gave to me. And it's my duty, of course it is, to use that talent, just like anybody else should use their talents, right? And for me, it was a double-edged sword because, and I'll tell you more about it, I have to come from the heart because there's no other way to come. When, I had told you before, that when I was on the PET scan table, when I had, it was like couple of weeks after I found out I had cancer, I had to wait like 2 weeks to go get a PET scan. You get a PET scan, and then that scan goes to, a board of doctors, where they decide how they're going to proceed with your treatment. That's the whole point of it, right? But it's true that when I was on that PET scan table, and I was about to ask Heavenly Father for my life, that He, excuse me, but I can't help it. My feelings right now, because of everything that's happened, are very tender, and I hope you understand. But He did, and it's not the first time the veil's been broken for me in my life. But He busted through loud and clear, and He did say, "This is not your time, and everything's going to be okay." I don't know how all of this could have happened, how people could be so cruel, but fast forward, when I went to go see Dr. Bott, and he sent me for a test, they did another scan, and they found spots, on my hip, like 2 on my hip, and slurs that were in my vertebrae. And so he sent me to Utah Valley Hospital, where they put me under twilight and went in and scraped my spine on these spots, right? And tested it and everything. So a few days or a week or so later, I went back to see Dr. Bott, and he was saying, "Oh, well, we are so sorry it came back, right? And we need to deal with this." And so all of the little procedures with the shots in the stomach, and there's some really painful ones too. All the blood tests, all constant blood tests, always having to go in and get, the CAT scan, which it was really strange too, because the CAT scan would pick up the cancer, but the bone scans never would. The bone scans never came up that I had cancer, but the CAT scans did, which was really strange to me. I don't understand why that would be, But I trusted my oncologist, right? And so But one of the things that I wanted to say was that when this came back, I was angry because God told me so clearly, this is not your time and everything's going to be okay. You know, and I had this wonderful trip where I went to Italy for 3 months, almost 3 months, yeah. And it was a wonderful experience. I really wanted to go see Pompeii so badly. You know, I had a real fascination with, because I'd already been to Greece. My whole thing was world wonder, wonders of the world of ancient history mostly. Ancient history fascinated me. I even started a business once that a neighbor stole from me. I found out during this. I had a beautiful website too, and for whatever reason, the administrator just disappeared on me. It's like it just poof, it was gone. And I went to the Better Business Bureau and said, so, this guy is just ripped me off, and I paid him like, I don't know how there was thousands of dollars I invested in this thing, and it pretty much all I had, and then to have it stolen like that was really tough, right? And especially by somebody who was so religious. I even got an attorney. I had to go find out, but anyway, long story short, I didn't understand. I went to Italy. I came back, had this bone. They scraped my bone. They told me, Dr. Bott told me, that it was back, and that we had to deal with this disease, and that I had 3 to 5 years, and there's no words really to describe. I had promised myself that if it ever did come back, that I would never do chemotherapy again, ever. That I would just have to accept it. And I wanted to go to Mexico because they had a treatment there that I learned about with my cousin, right? And also my cousin Doug was still around, and we worked with Rachel from Club 90 to do a fundraiser to help me to go to Mexico to get that treatment, right? But, and we raised some money, but it wasn't enough. And so I did some investing. And then it seemed like the investing would disappear. And I did Forex, and I did Bitcoin. And I was like all of a sudden, I have an account and suddenly it's gone. And it's like, and so I'm calling, I'm writing to London, I'm telling the police. It's just like, what the heck, But one of these things that, I wanted to say, and at the time, too, I was being scammed by somebody. And so was Stephen, the guy that I worked for. We were getting scammed by some people. And I think, it was because, we're older and, and he was an earth angel for sure. He was one of the most innocent people I've ever known. Really, he was. He was a very gentle soul. He never married. He was a real sweetheart, and he would give the shirt off his back. So he was he was a perfect target, right? Because he would just do anything for anyone. But and I found that I was protecting him from people that were working on the house, because somebody was always these workers would come in, do a terrible job, and then ask him for money. Sometimes the guy would come over, ask him for money, and wouldn't even work and would just leave. So it was kind of, he was like really, really sensitive. He really cared about people. And that was I know that he's an angel in heaven. And it was really, really, when he passed away, it was really a surprise. Well, I knew it would come sooner or later. But the way, I don't know, it just happened, and I really wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. There's never a time to be ready for something like that, But one of the things I wanted to say is that when I found out, and it was while I was I was already hired. I contracted with Stephen to be his live-in caregiver. And I had left a company called Interim Healthcare. And of course they were mad, but Stephen didn't care, We did a contract, and so I started working for him. And and when I found out that cancer had come back, it really angered me. I was angry with God because He promised me that I was going to be okay, and I didn't understand it. I never understood, and I did pray about it. I was like, how could this be? This is so. You said, this is not your time, and everything's going to be okay. And so I had this confusion going on, and so things started falling away from me. As far as like, I started to distance myself a little bit spiritually because I had no idea why that would happen, and it emotionally messed me up because of what the Spirit told me, and then to have that diagnosis, I really didn't get it. And psychologically, I had a niece, and her husband even did a video because we did a GoFundMe during that time too, because I really was raising money to be able to go to Mexico. And whatever happened, after Stephen died, and a couple of jumps, different houses before I went to Brenda's in Pleasant Grove, which was another thing, and getting COVID, falling, crushing my shoulder, having to have surgery, only to have people go out there and say that I'm a prostitute and that I'm this terrible person that I am absolutely not. There's things that it's just not even in my nature to go out and harm somebody deliberately. Now, even my moral compass, as far as when I was younger, even so, I had, more or less a standard, usually it was, falling in love, right, and, not really, and my parents, just the way that I was raised, my dad wasn't a member of the church when I was growing up. My mom was. But there was also in the South, too, this kind of a really staunchness about it, worse than Utah. Utah's not as staunch at all. You go to the different places in the country, and believe me, I have been, active in different states. They're a lot more sincere and follow the Lord a lot more closely. I think when they call it the mission field. But, I wasn't always an active member. But when my kids were, but because of, being a mom and having kids, I really did, especially when I was in Oregon, I became really active. And I did everything I could to raise my children in the way the church was telling me to. I had callings, I was a Sunday school teacher for the seniors. I've been in the Relief Society. There's just a lot that, I really served. I was a tithe payer. I really was active. And, and there's times, when you're single, especially I was a single mom with 4 children. I had 2 teenagers and 2 little boys. And we had just gone through this catastrophic situation with my son's father. And I won't go into that. That's very personal, and so I won't share that at this time. But our whole lives were turned upside down. And even though I'm not the one that did anything wrong, it appears that I'm the one that's being blamed for everything, which makes no sense at all. Not at all. I did everything by the book. To try to protect my children fiercely. I did the best I could. Now, as I look back, and I consider my relationship with God now. And now that I don't have to hide, that I can talk to my ancestors, because believe me, when I first found out I had cancer, before that PET scan, I had gone to get a mammogram. And I'd already left the doctor, right? Oh no, that leads me back to the beginning. I knew I had a lump. And I thought, and this is when I was in Provo and I noticed it in Springville too, but I noticed it quite a bit when I was living in the Oak Hills area up at Provo. And believe me, this is not the first time that the veil has been thin for me. And the thing is, I don't mind saying it because it's true. I can't deny it. The people that were trying to help me, they can't deny it. They passed. They can't prove themselves, but I had come back from South Carolina when I first found out that my dad was sick. He wasn't in a coma yet. And I had gone up to even the hospital to see Jan Red, my mother-in-law. She's a very sweet woman. And I saw her in Dale and Danny, Dale's, father, right? And so I'd gone up there and I was so glad that I got to see her. And, when I had left, she had, passed away like a week later. And I was like, and I didn't know yet that I had cancer. I didn't know at all, right? So when I got back from visiting my dad and seeing the Reds, I started, I was single. And I would notice this lump, on one of my breasts, and somebody was telling me, you need to go get that checked. And I would hear it, and I'm just like, and then it got so incessant that I finally started saying we don't have breast cancer in our family. It's okay. It's probably just fibrocystic, right? It's like no big deal. I really didn't take it seriously. I wasn't alarmed or anything. But finally, these visits were every single day. And I started to wonder if it was Jan that was telling me, you need to go to the doctor. You need to go get that checked every single day. Long story short, I went to the doctor. I was working at the Food and Care Coalition. We were having Bowls for Humanity. And I was getting this sharp pain in my neck. I don't know if you can see it. I think I've shown it to you before. And I thought I was getting an ear infection. And I was like, no, it's the worst time. It's because this big event's coming, and I've got all of these volunteers coming that, to help with the bowls and, all the things that we're selling. It was a huge event, right? So I went to go see my doctor. And he was looking at my ear and he goes, no, you don't have an ear infection, so everything looks fine. And then he leaves, and then all of a sudden I get yelled at. I mean, this wasn't the Holy Spirit. It was like, go get the doctor, show him your breast. It was like somebody was yelling at me. And so it was like, okay. I mean, I think I even responded like that, okay. And so I went back out there. I said, you know what? I need to show you something. And so he came back in, and I showed him the lump on my breast, and his eyes, they got as big as saucers. It was like, I've seen that. And he said that, I've seen that before. You need to go right now and get a mammogram. So I'm just like, oh, it's probably just fibrocystic, but it was like big, it wasn't little. It was kind of rectangular. It was probably about that big. It was big, and so I obeyed. I went, but I had taken Excedrin, and so the doctor said, we can't do a biopsy, but they were very concerned. And he said, well, we can't do a biopsy today because, I admitted because I was taking Excedrin. And they said, you'd bleed too much. So they sent me home and scheduled me to come back a week later. So I went home and I was like unnerved. So I was looking on the Mayo Clinic on the website, right? And I was looking at some of the symptoms. And then a couple of them just like really, it's just like somebody punched me right in the gut. And so I'm like pacing back and forth in the living room. And all of a sudden, I'm just about to get ready to get on my knees to say a prayer. Heavenly Father, do I have this thing? That was what was in my mind. So I said, Heavenly Father, do I have this thing? And, 4 different energies that I'm getting goosebumps just telling you this. They're probably right here. They were probably right here, right by me, part of my spirit team. Yes, you have this thing. They were yelling at me, and I could hear them. And you don't hear them with your natural ears, but boy, you hear them in your head, and they definitely speak English. There's no question about it. And there was distinctive energies yelling at me, saying, yes, you have this thing. And so it was really tough, to wait, that time to go back. And then when I did go back, I went with Debbie from the ward. She was my visiting teacher, and she went with me. And she was like doing, what is the breath work called when you're giving birth with the baby? She was like breathing, like panting. When the doctor was doing the biopsy, just breathe. Like I was going to give birth or something. But anyway, after it was done, I looked up at him and I said, and I already knew, because the spirit, the ancestors, my relatives, they told me already, but I looked up at the doctor and I said, so do I have this thing? And he looks at me and he just says, I'm so sorry. And so I was really numb, of course, because at that time they don't know what stage you're in or anything. And so I remember sitting in my truck freaking out, because it's just like, it was just the waiting was really tough. And I had to wait for 2 weeks before I had that PET scan, before I knew what stage I was in. I was in stage 3. They found a tumor. The tumor where I was telling you I had a shock in my neck, and so there was definitely a tumor there, and so it had to get taken out. Whoa! When they scraped for that, that was really bad, man. That hurt. But when I had the surgery, they nicked my cranial nerves. So kind of, sometimes you'll notice, especially when I'm tired, my mouth kind of is not. You'll notice that my mouth is a little different. It might look like that I have a lisp, but it was from that surgery. And it was like an NR tumor. It was like, it was definitely a tumor, but it wasn't malignant. That one wasn't. So that was good, because if it had been, I wouldn't be here talking to you, because it's like right here in my neck, right, close to my brain. But the cancer, there was, a lot of cancer in my lymph nodes. And, and I'm thinking about this, I guess, because somebody from United Healthcare came yesterday, and I had to talk to her about, the bazillion surgeries that I've had in regard to this. But, I have been so busy. And even from the past, when I think about when my kids were little, when I moved to Oregon, I was only 28 years old. I was still a young lady, I wanted to get married again. I wanted to have, a fruitful life. I played my guitar and sang. I played for weddings and I sang. I kept up with my talent too. I did a demo tape at a recording studio, and I told my dad about it, And he said, well, don't show Victoria that. It'll make her upset. It's like, what? I can't have my sister listen to a demo tape because she'll be upset. So I mean, and that wasn't the only time. I mean, he just wasn't as, supportive of me. I never really understood, the favoritism thing. And when you're raised in a family like mine, it was all about performance, making him proud. You couldn't just exist and be a good girl. You had to really perform, do something special. And so, but I was doing something special. But there was, this always, why? Why did they have to do that to us? I don't know. It's bizarre. Anyway, I don't feel, I never once felt less than any of my siblings. Never. I mean, never. No. I knew what my talents were. I mean, I was out there in the world. I mean, I was singing professionally. I was working on myself when I was younger. I had a boyfriend, that was, I was 16. He was a sophomore in college. I don't think that's allowed, but but that was the case, and he introduced me to these, adult band members, and, it worked out, and I traveled with them, and it caused some jealousy with my father. It was, growing up in that family was tough. It was it wasn't easy. There's things that you love, of course, but there's also things that are just so hard. But there was never a time, and this is what's confusing to me, is that there was never a time that I was ever so low vibrational that I should have ever been considered somebody not worth loving. I don't understand. Of course not. I was in a really rough situation in my youth with an abusive mother. I ran away once, and I stayed in my boyfriend's bedroom for a week because I didn't want to go back and be anywhere near Myrna. She knocked me out of a back glass window, and she was so physically abusive that's this one particular day, for no real reason. I probably just smarted back at her or something, but she just popped me one, and I just reflex. I hit her back, and boy, that was it. She threw me through the back glass door. And so after that, I left, of course, and I was 17, and I stayed in Frank's bedroom for a week, hiding from his dad because I didn't want to go home. And I think I finally talked to my dad, and he talked me into coming back. But ever since I'd come back, and I was in the band at that point too. So ever since I had come back to the house, I was sleeping on the couch until I left for good. And I was looking for a way to leave, which made sense, when I met Dale. I met Dale at a party. It was a band party. A lot of musicians got together, some good musicians, Lyrics, some other bands, with it around Aiken in North Augusta. And I had met Dale there, and boy, what a guitarist. Wow, he was good. Really good. But, I just admired that. I really admired him. And, but I never, you never know what's going to happen. You don't. And, but the thing is that I did end up getting, pregnant. And I had a beautiful baby. There was rough times because I didn't want to tell my mom or my dad, because if I had, they would have called my baby a bastard, like they did my sister Norma's child. And I couldn't bear that. It's like, you're not going to, no. I mean, I didn't want to tell him because the judgments were already, so stiff, just, and to her credit, she didn't have a really great upbringing. Her dad died when she was 8, and she didn't really have a lot of parenting herself. But it was just over the top judgments, bullying, and physical abuse. And so I just, behind the scenes in secret, just planned a marriage with a 19-year-old boy. By that time, I think I was 18, he was 19, and I didn't want to tell them anything. I just told them I was getting married. I didn't tell them anything. And I think I did tell the Reds. I couldn't, I was too afraid to tell them because of how I knew how cruel they'd be. And so when you're in that situation, and I look back at my childhood and I think about how I grew up and what I went through, what my friends knew that I went through living there. How could they ever be so low, so cold, as to come after me? I was good to them. I was a good friend. I would have never in a million years thrown my friends under the bus. I loved them. And, believe it or not, before all this happened, every once in a while, we'd talk on the phone during birthdays. I mean, that stopped for the last couple of years, but I don't understand how that could have happened. I mean, was everybody really just waiting for me to die? They were just waiting for me to die. But, when I wrapped my head around the fact that it had come back, my daughter told me about Star Maker. That's when I started singing. And even though what happened was terrible and so cruel and unfair, I was sharpening my skills because I am a professional singer. I have sang professionally, and I am a professional singer, and I know what the hell I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm doing with my talent and my voice. I can do a lot of fun things with my voice. Really cool things. And I was developing myself. And it was distracting me from the cancer diagnosis that I had. And so here I go through all of these different medical issues. But I'm still singing. Come hell or high water, I keep singing. It was really hard to sing after COVID because I was on I had to have an oxygen tank for a couple of months after that. And it was and I couldn't really fill my lungs to full capacity with my breathing. But the singing probably healed me faster than if I weren't a singer at all, because you have to breathe and hold and extend that breath to hold that note. And so just doing that exercise of pushing myself back, to the best of my ability, strengthened my lungs, I know, a lot faster than it probably would have happened if I wasn't singing. I remember sitting in the living room at that place, that disgusting place in Pleasant Grove. And I think I had just crushed my shoulder at that point. And I might have mentioned before that I was telling a roommate's relative, why has God kept me alive? Isn't that odd? What am I doing here still? It's 2022. I've got all these other issues, these other medical things coming up, but what's going on with this cancer thing? And I would still have to go to the doctor, still have to get the CAT scans, all the blood work. I mean, they kept me there every 3 to 6 months. And it was me that had to say, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. I got a special permission to go to Huntsman. And he agreed. I mean, and Dr. Bott was, they put me on Verzenio and Kisqali, and it really affected my intestines severely, and it would just like wring you out, make you so tired. And I remembered what I said, that I promised myself that I wasn't going to do chemo again, and that come what may, I wasn't. And it's really funny. I mean, I was going to use this, but I'll have to use it for another talk. I'd written some notes down. But I remember punching out the pill from the little packet and trying to, and I'd done it, I'd taken it for a week or so, and then I would try to put it in my mouth, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't, something stopped me. It was like, pulling my hand away that I couldn't take it. And so I just couldn't. And then I wanted an opinion from Huntsman. I went up to Huntsman, and he looked at the same CAT scans, and the comparison was just, the changes were very minimal. I mean, they said it would show growth, but it was just so minimal. And so he said, I don't blame you. He says, until this thing is really growing, you're probably right. You shouldn't have to take Kisqali and Verzenio. I mean, they never said that I was in remission, not even at Huntsman. But it didn't really make sense. And then 9 months ago, I was supposed to go in and see, Dr. Nuttall, the oncologist. Dr. Bott had died, right? And then the guy at Huntsman retired, and I just went back to the regular, cancer center with Revere Health. And I asked him, why am I still alive? You know, it's been past, 5 years. It's like 6 years now. Why am I still alive? Which begs the alarms to ring when you find out that you have an inheritance that you've been left out of. And you ask questions. And why is everybody acting so funny? And why, and really weird. And I had did some research. I'd called this FBI insurance inheritance theft number a couple, and I don't know if they got the message, but I was telling them, who I was and who my family was, and that I had some suspicions that maybe I wasn't their child, that I was somebody else's child. And just because of the behavior changing, and then when I was reading the research about this, life insurance fraud, and it's one of the biggest white collar crimes in the nation. It's huge. And that supposedly the FBI was really trying to crack down on that. It didn't make sense that, this would have been done on purpose by, and I know that just from the beginning when I was starting to talk about what was going on Facebook, that investigators here in Salt Lake knew what they had done, and yet why? How hard would it be to, okay, this person has a terminal diagnosis. This ex hates her. She's got jealous siblings. It would take absolutely no effort whatsoever to find the motive and to figure out what was going on 10 years ago. Don't you know that I know that? Of course I know the FBI. I know that. Whoever the locals are. And I called the FBI too, and they didn't want to take me seriously. That's fine. Because then I had to come, and I called the police too, talked to them about it too. So I come on here and just keep saying, look, something's wrong, And I knew that they were coming after me from Star Maker, and I knew that they had attacked the platform and everybody that I knew. I could see what was going on Facebook. And things were coming up with the family that were really bizarre, unexplainable. Mystery that I would get a pinch of it, but they wouldn't tell me the whole thing. And so and you can feel these things, right? If you're paying attention, you can feel it when someone is being deceitful or hiding something from you. And so I'm like waving, oh please, FBI, President Trump, anybody, listen to me, something's going on. And then they saw that so many people were attacking me. They were coming after me. Interesting. Well, I still don't have all the answers. I mean, I know a lot, right? Thank heaven for these gifts that I have, where I really can often, and especially lately, communicate with people that love me, that have passed on, that can see what's going on behind the scenes. And often I've felt that I'm picking up information from people that are not dead too. Yep, that's definitely happened. And I can discern different energies. I know exactly, well, if I know them, I know exactly. I mean, even if I just kind of know them or know about them, I can kind of distinguish, but especially if they're consistent. But genuinely, I've had to stay in constant prayer, constantly, because of this attack that's been on me. I'm not guilty of any crime. They have no reason to even surveil me or come after me. I don't have a criminal history. They knew that. The police knew that. That would be the first thing that they would have to check before they would be able to do surveillance on you. And I knew about the CCTV and the Unstoppable program with Tony Robbins, and my association going to the master class of theirs, his and Dean Graziosi, however you say that, I don't know how. look, I know, there's no way to deny it at this point, right? And I know the players at Star Maker. I know the haters. I'm aware that they knew of my talent and that they were stealing from me. There's no hiding this anymore. And I really need the Department of Justice. Hear me, hear my heart. And I had a comforting read today from these spiritualists that really do want the truth too. They really do. They appreciate that right now on our social media platforms, there's a lot of attacks going on in a lot of different areas, where I heard another something from South Carolina. People in high places committing crimes. And that we need to be so hyper vigilant and holding people's feet to the fire that we expect more from our leaders than they expect. And there's a lot of leaders that expect more from their colleagues, I'm sure. I know that's true. Hear my voice. Hear my heart. I've endured enough. And I really need communication from you. Even the Department of Justice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I did send a few weeks ago an email to victims advocate at the Department of Justice in Salt Lake City. And it's gotten to the point where this attack for the purpose of theft and fraud that has blown him to a full-blown RICO crime. Distortions of character to harm me as a person, the person I really genuinely am. And just because somebody doesn't want to believe your faith anymore, because there was a talk that was given by, I really loved him. I still, he was wonderful. Holland, Jeffrey R. Holland. He said, if the Book of Mormon isn't true, then we don't have a religion. That's what he said. I remember that talk because we were in the Springville house, and it was Conference Sunday, and that's what he said. My boys were still at home. They were still young in high school. And so, when the history, or forensics goes back and they discover that, some of the claims, and, there's been really in-depth, you'll have to watch Mormon stories and to listen to different people that have done the actual forensic research on the Book of Mormon. And believe me, it's a good book, and it does kind of follow along the same way the Bible does, except that there's different, characters. I have taught Sunday school lessons about characters that I have loved as I've read the Book of Mormon myself. But when you find out, beyond reasonable doubt, about the translation and the way that it came about from the golden plates, and trying to find some correlation. And this is just one of the reasons, right? We're not even talking about what was going on as far as polygamy and polyamory at the time that the church was being organized, and what was going on there. There's so much more to know that mainstream church doesn't really talk about. But for me, and you don't have to know, if you want to you can go by faith, that's fine. But you can't come after and attack a person because they've educated themselves to some things that are not propaganda. It's actually based on research. And what was going on in New York at the time that this book was written, and how it came from the Freemasons, how all that came about, and how they started the new religion of the LDS Church, okay? And then you might have to consider all the offshoots in modern times. And the polygamy and the children and the different physical violations, I'll put it that way, physical violations of younger children in the offshoots, right? Practices by people within the organization that kind of go off on their own and do their own, secret societies. There's so much more than mainstream knows. And so for me, I'm very respectful of the feelings of others. I truly am. And I don't want to break anybody's heart about this. But I feel like I owe it to myself to tell you why I made that decision. And it's a hard decision to make. But because, believe me, my whole heart and soul, there's so many things that happen. So many spiritual experiences I actually have had as a part of that faith. I'm not saying that everything is bad or wrong with it, because it's not. And there's some good people. I was one of them. And I'm not the person that these people painted me to be at all. Not at all. I've had callings. I've had endowments. I've gone to the temple. I am not the monster whatsoever that they've claimed me to be. And just because I show my shoulders and cleavage, because believe me, after breast cancer, you kind of want to, feel like a woman again. So what? That's my business. I can look like I want to look like. I am free from an oppressive faith that is not letting me burst forth in my creativity and be the person that I'm exactly meant to be, with my psychic and mediumship clairvoyant abilities that I was born with. I didn't ask for them. It's just that I just come packaged that way. And I tell the truth. And people hate it. I tell the truth to the best of my understanding. And if I'm ever wrong, if I say something that's wrong, I will be the first to say, I'm sorry, I realize how you might believe that or think that way. And we can have a discussion. But as a human being, we all have a right to attest to what we feel is right inside of ourselves. And no church should be chasing after somebody because they have gleaned some information that has opened their eyes to some things. No, I have an open heart and an open mind and an open spirit. And I know that we're all children of God. And you can't say that you are a child of God and cruelly go after a person, commit perjury in a court of law, forge contracts, erase them from inheritances, create life insurance policies on somebody that you might not even be related to, and think that these federal crimes, block their mail, block their SSDI, call them a liar, call them a whore. That's literally. Say that they have an STD, like HIV. Do everything they can to rob them blind. And all because I didn't die when I was supposed to and they got tired of waiting. This should be a red flag to the FBI. Eons ago, 10 years ago. I had an ex-husband that opened up, before I was married to him, he opened up a credit card in his ex-wife that he had already been divorced from her. He got a bifurcation with her too so that they could settle their assets later. But he actually did, sign her up for a credit card that he used. He did that. They were already divorced. I think that's credit card fraud. I'm sure he did it to me too. I'm sure he found a way. Beyond stealing, this person has committed a lot of, crimes with his law degree. I don't mind telling you, okay? And willing to twist things to his narrative, to cry and make people feel sorry for him. And maybe there was a reason at one time, and yet to have a girlfriend show up at the hospital, to have him be so physically violent and pushing us around, to not being able to keep him from taking the keys and getting into the car, asking his family for help, because I physically could not control him. And he was dangerous to me and my children. And he told the people and in the hospital, had told them point blank that he intended to harm me. That's why they said, you need to get your kids out of there and you need to go. So I did. And it took courage. Believe me, I felt bad. I felt so conflicted. But it didn't last long. When you consider my children and this guy,